Welcome to this afternoon's conversation. Really excited as we talk about the future of career education. I'm Michael Horn, really looking forward to engage with my friend Jean Eddy, who leads ASA, American Student Assistance. She's going to tell us what that is in just a moment as we delve in, but we really want to have a conversation around this space and its importance so that everyone can partake in the American dream, not just those who have access to social capital or certain advantages. Jean has been on the board of ASA before being CEO for 20 years and lots of roles in higher education and so forth. But just why don't you start out and tell people what ASA is and what it does, just to ground us a little bit.
Okay, great. Oh, I don't think I'm on.
Coming on now. Oh, new microphone. All right.
Sorry about that. So, ASA, we're a nonprofit. We're based in Boston, and we help kids figure out what their interests and passions are, how they align with their abilities and talents, what careers might be open to them at the intersection of those two things, and then how kids can test and try as they move through high school to leave high school with some kind of a plan. We start early. We start in middle school. And we're really all about helping kids know what their options are so that they can make really good choices.
And I'm just curious because, I mean, you hear career education, you hear your background in higher ed. How did you personally come to this place of thinking about career education as young as middle and high school and this question of passion and purpose and things like that? How did you come to that?
So most of my career I spent in higher ed, and I would have to say I love higher ed. And I worked with kids from all across the spectrum, and I would have to say that I dealt with a lot of young people, love kids, so it was my passion, no matter what size, age range, et cetera. But what I found was there were an awful lot of kids that I was working with in college who really didn't know why they were there. Like, it was expected of them to be there. It was kind of the next thing, and many said, well, I came because my parents thought I should come. But they really didn't have a direction. They didn't really have that purpose. And so I watched that for a bit. And then, of course, as Michael said, I was on the board at ASA. And for a number of years, 60-plus years, ASA has helped borrowers figure out how to repay their debt. And I would listen to the stories of borrowers say, I wish I hadn't borrowed so much money. I don't know what I was thinking. What I'm making now doesn't align with what I can afford to repay. And so a few years ago now, 5, ASA started to examine, well, how could we make the two come together? And I was really interested in trying to get ahead of this problem rather than trying to put a Band-Aid on after the fact. So we did a lot of research. We did a lot of reading. It's when I first actually became introduced to Michael. And we found that those formative years in middle school really are the time where kids are open, they're curious, they're inquisitive, and they really want to understand what's available to them. And they're not so afraid to take a different path than what their friends might want to do. That certainly changes as kids go further into the system and into high school, but middle school seems to be prime time. So 5 years ago, we decided that we were going to play an active role in changing the paradigm and working with young kids to help them figure this out.
It's interesting. I just think about my own journey into this world, as you know. And I think in some ways it's similar. Like, I did this book on choosing college, which I was book signing earlier today. It's in the bookstore here. And it was just so, I mean, I feel like one of the misses in the book in retrospect was we didn't think enough about how so many students, a major conclusion was so many students, they go to college to do what's expected of them. Uh-huh. And they don't have a deep intrinsic reason. And our research was incredibly clear. 74%, when you go to do what's expected of you, drop out or transfer. Mm-hmm. Like, the outcomes are incredibly bad. And we know that debt is not a bad thing as long as it is an investment that pays off. And debt is really injurious where you don't get that degree, where you don't graduate. Mm-hmm. And if we can see that in these youth and these individuals coming into school, and then obviously my colleague, friend Julia Freeland Fisher wrote her book, Who You Know, about the importance of social capital in young people's lives. And I just, from my perspective, it just became clearer and clearer that much earlier in our K-12 schooling system, we needed to be intentionally and deliberately helping people understand all of the pathways that were out there, how their strengths and aptitudes and so forth lined up with them, their passions, and to think about this purpose question in a way that I think had sounded very like erudite and sort of obscure to me before, right? Yeah. But I think in a very, IDEO always says your purpose becomes like what you do, right? Like it's built on action. And I think we have to be way more intentional about it, because all these surveys will have you believe that people go to college just to get a job. They don't even know what jobs are out there or how it aligns to who they are and so forth. And I always made the joke that I grew up in the Beltway in Washington, D.C., and I thought there were like two career paths, lawyer and politician. And, I didn't know I thought engineers were people that worked on trains. Because we don't have engineers in Washington, D.C., it turns out. So I think it's interesting that we've both come to the same conclusion, that we have to have this conversation much earlier. But I'd love you to go deeper in your mind of, like, what's the problem that we're really, these students come into college, maybe choosing other pathways, but without this sense of purpose, and but dig a little bit deeper and peel back the layers of what the problem is.
So, I think, and I don't know if we have any teachers in this room at all, but that's okay. It's good, it's excellent, actually. We have to pack a lot into school days, and teachers are asked to do more and more and more and more. And I think as a society, we've kind of missed the boat in being able to show students a myriad of careers that aren't just about college. Kids can't, and I'll go back to what Julia Freeland Fisher says, kids can't even aspire to be what they don't know about. So if we don't do a better job in showing kids about various careers, all kinds, as well as giving them opportunities to test and try, and that's the other thing. How do you pack that in? The only way you can really do that is kind of beyond the classroom. Either do it digitally, directly with a student, or do it in some kind of programs that work with school systems that allow you to do that. But those two things have just not been happening. And so what do we do now to kind of help school systems make the pivot? And we would contend, and have been doing this now for a couple of years, where we're providing beyond the classroom solutions, where we're meeting kids where they are so they can go exploring on their own, where they live on their mobile devices, and have them figure out, gee, I'm really good at this, or I love to do that, and the myriad of career choices that they could look at and have potential to do. And then we work with them, and again, other partners, to have them try things out while they're in high school so that they can make really good choices by the time they leave high school. And it could be college, and certainly I'm all for college, but that is not for every kid. What are those other possibilities that they could find out if we start early enough?
So it's so interesting. So what do these solutions then look like? Like, give us more tactile almost for a digital solution. What do these look like that you all have invested behind, that you've helped create and so forth?
So I think the first experiment we did with students was we created a number of video experiences for kids in grades 6 through 12. And it basically gave them 24 different ways to go out and experience what kids their own age in this process were looking at. And whether it be, gee, I always wanted, well, one young woman wanted to be a gamer. And in this particular video, she had to sit in front of a group of her parents primarily, and her guidance counselor and someone else, and convince them that it was okay for her to take coding camp, those kinds of things, rather than pursue what her parents and her guidance counselor wanted her to do. Young people gravitated to that in amazing numbers. But it was also things like, I want to be a lawyer, or I want to go and work on antique cars. And that was another young man who had enormous success with people viewing it. And from that, we realized that they were really, well, I should say, stop. We had over 34 million views of those videos, which was staggering to us. So then we thought, okay, what can we do next? Let's see if we can't do something that's fun, because I'm all about fun. You also say that in your books. School should be about fun, and it should be being about making friends. So why don't we create something that kids can go out and have fun, and while they're having fun, they are doing an assessment of sorts. So they're doing puzzles, they're doing games, all kinds of things like that, and lo and behold, at the end of the day, they find out that they have all these attributes and interests. And we call the product Futurescape. It's an experience, and it's really being in a planetarium. So after a student goes through all those games and puzzles, they suddenly, the world opens up, they look up, there are glowing planets, there are big planets, and those planets represent areas of interest, but also the many, many careers associated with those things. And if a student clicks on one of those planets, they can go do more exploring. Like, what kind of a education do you need? Where might you go to get there? How much does it cost to do that? Can you get internships? And from there, we start connecting students, either with partners, and we do a lot with partners, to get that first internship, or go shadow someone. Or I know David Shapiro was up a bit ago, get a mentor in the space to do that. So it's those kinds of things that make the experience deeper and deeper and deeper. And right now, again, in this platform, we have over 11 million kids who are doing just that. So they like it, and frankly, this is a digital generation. They're on their cell phones anyway. If there is something that we can do that is engaging and they like, and along the way they can get exposed to more things, why not?
Yeah, I love it also because, obviously it takes a page from the disruptive innovation. Go to the non-consumption where the alternative is nothing for them to learn about these, but you're doing something that they're trying to do, which is to have fun, make progress in their lives, explore, learn who they are, build their own identity. And it's occurred to me there's a fair amount of research base around these games and so forth for building aptitudes. There's a company, UScience. I was talking to the CEO recently, and like you said, I love the analogy of the planetarium. But the moment you start to say, "Hey," or StrengthsFinder, even like some of these little ones, hey, you start to light up some of these boxes here, and you naturally think, well, gee, that must mean I'm going to be an X, right? Mm-hmm. And it turns out through research, you can say, actually, there's like 5 to 10 other careers that you've probably never thought of. Let us teach you about those. Let us allow you to connect with people and start to see what a day in the life would look like. Is this sort of work that you would like to do? Okay, some of this is, some of this isn't. Well, now we can actually introduce something else adjacent to that and start to open up these just areas that they would never otherwise think of. And then that final piece, that connection of mentors, people in the space that can help coach you and say, okay, you want to get to here, this is what it's going to take. I can open this door, and on, that starts to bring it down. 11 million kids doing it, though, is pretty freaking impressive.
It's beyond impressive, and I would have to say that what's even better about it is that students on the platform write their own testimonials to us. So we have a group of students that we have an advisory group, about 1,500 of those students who we talk with quite a bit, but we have students that totally unsolicited come forward and say, gee, I found out about this, I didn't know it existed, or I feel so much better now, I don't feel like I'm under so much pressure. Just really rave reviews. I think our satisfaction scores is 92%. So it's really something that people like. It's fun, so that certainly helps.
A key criteria, obviously, of it. I'm curious, why aren't more funders, foundations, others focused on this space in your view? It seems like ASA has been, y'all have been thinking about this for several years, as you said, and acting in it for several years. Maybe you disagree, but it doesn't feel to me that like the weight of other groups and funders has sort of come in behind you the way we might hope.
I think that's starting to change.
Good.
I know when we first started doing research in the space, I was surprised to find that there were many companies, foundations, and other nonprofits who were taking one piece of the puzzle, and they did one piece of the puzzle incredibly well. When I first started talking about this, I always said it's more to me about the journey. I want to engage with a young person in middle school, and I want to stay with them. I want to make sure that every step along the way they have the tools they need. So what's nice about working on this project now is that those providers are now some of our partners who are actually coming in and putting in the pieces as we are trying to build this ecosystem for schools, for kids.
So that takes you at a very system level view also. So I'm curious, as you think about the system, how do you get even more people in, or more robust content and options and connections and so forth? Like, what's it going to take to start moving more and more schools to say, hey, maybe we don't try to put yet another thing on a teacher's plate, but we create more and more of these opportunities?
I think it's the partnerships we create. I think it's audiences like this. I would have to say that I have spoken to a lot of teachers groups and school superintendents who are fascinated by this whole notion and believe that there has to be a place beyond the classroom because, as I said before, teachers just have too much to do, and there's too much having to be packed into the day. And certainly, we also had great advice from educators. So it wasn't as if we were going into their world and not getting their input and direction on what made sense and what worked. So I think that is certainly going to help. And I also think that it's a case of building out more and more and more. The more partnerships we do, the bigger audiences we get, the more people who we will become aware, and they will be introducing their own students to this.
It's a lot of momentum that's starting to build. It occurs to me, I think I'm curious your reaction to this. It seems to me that it's described that America is often a world of pendulums, right? We swing wildly back and forth. So from the shopping mall schools, we went to college for all, and now it's sort of swinging back a little bit. People are saying maybe not college for all. To your point, what seems different to me, ideally, about the conversation that you're helping to spearhead and we're a part of is that a lot of the worries, obviously, about moving away from a college for all is that educators or guidance counselors or whomever might make the choices for the students of, are you quote unquote college material or not, and track them. But I think what's unique about, or a really interesting opportunity here, is that if the students themselves in middle and high school are building deeper understanding of what is out there, how does it connect to what I'm good at, what I'm passionate about, what I like to do, that they can make those choices themselves as opposed to being placed in a particular track. Plus, it'll connect more clearly to the academics that they need to learn if they truly want to go into such and such field or whatever else. And some of those may have a college pathway, some of those may have an apprenticeship pathway into a trade, whatever. It strikes me that we can make this much more student-driven and let them have agency in that decision-making process, which I think would combat a lot of the negative potentials, right, out of swinging back completely away from a college for all message that a lot of people are worried about, where those things were often sorted based on race, gender, and things of that nature. But I'm curious your take on that question.
Well, I absolutely believe, and we've done a lot of research in this space, this Gen Z generation. They are looking for voice, they are looking for agency. They very much want to go and do some exploring, come back and check in. This is important. They come back and they check in with their teachers. They come back and they check in with their parents. And then they go back out and do some more exploring. So it's not as if anybody is being cut out of this conversation, but they do feel as though they are more actively driving what may happen in this. And I think the other thing I would say for any kind of pathway that doesn't first start off in college, it does not mean that it's never going to be college. We live in a world right now, constant learning. We have stackable credentials, we have certificates, we have a whole host of things that may allow people to go into some careers that are not requiring a bachelor's degree, but certainly they may decide to go on to something deeper to get a bachelor's degree based on what they've learned in that career.
100% agree. It's interesting you bring that up, Jean, just because obviously, as you know, a major recommendation out of the Choosing College book I wrote was that many more students ought to be taking a gap year. We've lived through the last couple years where many students are indeed taking a gap year. The danger is that it might stretch into years and then they may never go at all. And my sense is that that's an opportunity for a bunch of actors in the system to start innovating to create curated gap year experiences that aren't, just taking sort of a line job and staying there for a whole year, nor are they grabbing a backpack and getting a rail ticket and trepsing around Europe, but really a deliberate set of working and learning experiences that also are building a sense of who you are and to feed into your notion, which I think is right, which is education isn't linear. It's not going to be like we stay in the train and check off the next stop and check off the next stop, and then it's my 40-year stop in my career, and then I retire, right? It's going to be much more coming in and out of education throughout your life. And if you take that mental model, then all of a sudden you've shifted to one where, great, you're going to graduate high school, you're going to go work for a couple years, and then college is that next step. And maybe college looks very different from that residential model that is, frankly, for a very select few as it is right now, despite the popular sort of narrative about it. But it is this thing you're coming into and out of far more fluidly and fluently as the need for more upskilling arises in your career. No question there, I guess, just a statement.
But I would just say, again, in a previous panel today, we were talking about how so many companies now are changing their HR practices to not include bachelor's degree absolutely required. In fact, particularly at IBM as an example right now, they are asking all of the managers who post jobs right now to make absolutely sure that if they're going to check off that someone is required to have a 4-year degree, that they are intentional about what that means. And so an awful lot of people now are being employed that were not employed before, but that does not mean that they can't take the next step in learning something new or adding on to the skills that they're walking through the door with. And I think that I hope that's where we are headed.
Yeah, and it seems to me, so building more of these partnerships and connectivity that you're doing is important so that we build a system that doesn't let people sort of fall through cracks where there isn't coverage. And that's going to be the real trick of this. In my mind, it's not just because there's not going to be that linear pathway that we're trying to shepherd everyone through. But you really do want that network of coverage, if you will, to make sure that people are being exposed to, are asking questions and connecting it. I also think, and I'm curious your reaction, because you all obviously have started outside of the sort of school day and so forth, right, in the formal classroom structure, which I think for a ton of reasons is smart. But I also still think that the most effective implementations in a district will be when they integrate this with the coursework. Our friends at Cajon, very close by here, some of you may have visited today, I think have done amazing work, right, integrating over 50 deliberate learning experiences about careers throughout the academic journey. That to me sort of pours proverbial gasoline on the fire, right? To really goose up these opportunities and create a lot more deliberate connections. I'm curious how you see sort of the informal and formal, maybe bad word choices, but go with it, how you see that merging and maybe becoming a bigger whole over time.
Well, I think for those of you who have not visited Cajon Valley or don't know about the world of work, I really strongly suggest to take a look at it. What is really unbelievable about the World of Work program, which is now encompassing 7 school districts in that area, that was really a case of everyone in the community, from the superintendent, the school board, the elected officials, everybody made a pact, so to speak, and a commitment to do career education with young people so that they could educate kids throughout the process and be able to have them come out with a workforce that was going to be contributing to their area. And what's important about that is they, like all kinds of places across this country, have a lot of disengaged, disconnected youth. Nationally, we have over 5 million kids in that boat who are not in school and they're not working. So what are they doing? But, and I always say this to David Maiasharo, who is the superintendent of schools there. He went out and changed minds and hearts. The entire community came together, employers, teachers, superintendents, families, to come together to approach career education in this very, very different way. Now, I don't think that every school system can possibly do that, but I think people can take pieces of it. And what my hope is that if we just provide enough of those opportunities in places, some folks will take some people will take none, some people will take all. But it's an idea to be able to add to the system and be able to change it.
Yeah, and it's interesting what David and Ed and others there did when they were working with Qualcomm and others. From my perspective, I think you're right. They changed hearts and minds, but they did it because they started with really like a clear statement of what the problem was ultimately, and they got others to buy in with them that there was a problem. And so often I see people in education start with the solution and throw that down, as opposed to this sort of like, here's why this is a problem. Here's why this isn't working for the students, the parents, the companies, the community,
Good point.
right? And then they were able to build the solution, I mean, in many ways together through that and create something. And I don't think every district should build a solution like they did. It exists now, but I think the reason for the solution is something that should be built organically in each community so that they can figure out how to use it, because not every district, I agree, is going to implement it in the exact same way.
Right.
Certainly not every school is going to implement it as early as elementary school like they have. But I think, you know, different places will find different ways. And my own sense, like, if it were up to me, many more high schools would have flipped school days. Forget about flipped classroom, flipped school days where students were starting in the community in an internship or a job, apprenticeship, and then coming to the school to do projects and coursework, and sports and everything else. And then at night taking one or at most 2 online courses at a time, and building that knowledge. You could imagine a platform like that being put into a community that would, you know, build awareness much more quickly of like, okay, gee, I've got tons of internships I could choose from or jobs or whatever else. Which one? Well, by actually cycling through all these different careers that they've profiled and the pathways and getting far more granular on what does it take? What does it look like, right? No surprises, because every job has its parts that stink. So let's make it transparent. I think students can make a lot more informed choices on the front end, then get real experience working in it. That builds a need to know in the academic knowledge, makes it far more likely that when college is the right next step, they'll be ready for it and excited about it and motivated for it. Not going just because someone expected them to go, but instead it's the next step in their lives toward their goals that they have more clearly defined, I think. So from my perspective, like the more we can drive toward that integrated, the better. But I think you're right. Each community is going to have that conversation in its own way to figure out where do they land on that spectrum and how to, you know, what's their special mix of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we've had, and we have, a number of partnerships with school systems, you know, not only in Cajon Valley, but in the state of Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. And the one thing we've learned in all of those relationships is that nobody does it the same way. Nobody does. Someone has a great idea. They may institute it, and it will be a marvelous success in Hope Valley, Massachusetts. And then you go 50 miles down the road, and it's not going to work in their community. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. So we have to work to provide the elements for what could be there or what people will embrace, and then have folks make it their own. And I think that's critically important in this, because if not, it's not going to be adopted. And again, I'll go back to teachers are key in this. they have to be able to see that this is something that works for them, they believe in it, and they want to take the time to do it.
Yeah, and as our friend Jane Swift, former governor of Massachusetts and now leads Learn Launch Institute, often says, districts can use 2/3 playbooks, but
Yep.
don't give them the last third because it is going to be customized. And I think a lot of times when people are innovating or entrepreneurs in places like this, you want to see scale and fidelity, and it's just not going to happen, whether it should or shouldn't. It's just, this customization. And the communities are genuinely different, right? The regional workforces are different. The economies are different. And so I think there is good in that customization as long as you're having that why conversation up front and a clear statement of what are we trying to solve for and how is it going to benefit everyone in this community if we do this better, right? And I guess that gets me into sort of the last set of questions that I'm excited about, because you all had a big announcement earlier today, which is $125 million, I believe you're investing over 4 years in solutions that move the needle against this. Tell us more. What sorts of investments might these be? Who in the audience ought to be pitching you afterwards, and so forth?
I would have to say that we announced it, and within a matter of maybe 30 minutes, Rilwan Miran, who was our VP of Social Impact Investing, started to immediately get calls and meetings being set up. So I think that's where he is right now, as a matter of fact, which is really excellent. We really believe that if we invest in this space, that we can provide the solutions that we need to be able to move the needle, as you say. We have invested in some funds. The funds support companies that basically believe, as we do, that we need to do more in this space, and that can be through tech solutions. We run platforms, so we certainly believe in tech solutions, but we do not want to build all of them ourselves. In fact, we feel as though it's absolutely appropriate and I would have to say uplifting to be working with partners who bring solutions to us that we may not have thought of and certainly want to see play out. But in addition to that, we also want to be able to do some investing in partnerships. People who, again, believe as we do that there is a role to be played in mentors, creating internships, various boot camps, those kinds of things. We also want to invest in those because we want to have as many options as we possibly can for young people to be able to test and try. So putting all of that together, we are certainly hoping that we will have, that we will be able to fill out this field, as you say, and have more and more people come together and work on this with us. We have a really big goal of impacting 15 million kids in the 6th through 12th grade space by 2023. There are 30 million kids in this space. We're well on our way there, but we need those extra programs, partnerships, and investments to put us over the edge and make sure that we do it and can sustain it.
So let me just make sure I got this right, because you're serving roughly 11 million kids today, so that's basically doubling in the next year the impact in terms of students being touched.
Our goal is to be 15 million, so we're looking for 4 more million students. But I've had this conversation with a few people, and they're looking at me saying, well, if there's 30 million kids, what's the big deal of getting to half of them? I'm going to say the challenge, not the problem, is the fact that kids move in, kids move out. So the 12th graders of today are now going to be going on to something else, and we're going to have new kids going into middle school. And so it's a constant group of kids that we have to engage, we have to really excite, and have them feel as though there are options for them. And the other thing I will say about these digital natives is they get bored really easily. So you have to have fresh content, you have to have exciting content, and you have to want to continue to have them want to come back and work with you again and again and again.
So you're winning them every single day, it sounds like.
We're trying hard to do that.
As Reed Hastings would say, like we're in the attention world, right, is our competition.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm curious, so that sounds like for-profits, not-for-profits, like it sounds like a pretty wide range of entities tackling this problem, and you said boot camp, so it sounds like even maybe pulling it further toward the end of high school, maybe even post-high school, you might be even investing behind.
There are opportunities for young people right now to have apprenticeships, boot camps. There's a 13th year program in Massachusetts that is gaining a lot of traction. Any and all of those things that allow students to have an opportunity to go out and, again, test and try and experiment. The whole notion of a gap year. So many kids, I really wish so many would go out and try an apprenticeship when they leave high school, just to see what's out there, or do a short training program, or something like that, that would really start to have them connect with what really might work for them and what might not. We started doing exploration classes with 6th and 7th graders in some of our school systems in Massachusetts. We were surveying them before we did the exploration classes and then afterward. And we put programs in place so that all the kids in that school could participate in exploration classes. And when we surveyed them after the fact, they said things like, gee, I loved the experience, really glad I had a chance to do that. I absolutely hate coding. I never want to touch another coding class again. But again, that to me was wonderful.
That's a win, though, right?
It's a
because
total
it
win.
Pulls something out of the list, yeah.
And then there were the other flip side of that was young women, which I have a particular bias about, young women in computer science who were saying, this is just the best thing I've ever done. I want to do more of it. And just by that little taste, they could go ahead and do that. And so that's really what this is all about.
That's awesome. Truly awesome. It's interesting also, though, on the I don't want to do this.
Yep.
A lot of times, and this isn't just true in this field, it's in lots of fields, yep. When we do a lot of the research on developing, and trying to understand what progress people want to make, what jobs they have in their lives, people are far more articulate about what they don't like than what they do. It's really hard to trust people when they say they like something, but they're very, very articulate at ruling things out. And so if you can give them options and say, oh, no, it's not that, it starts to allow you as the innovator to get closer and closer to what it is, and then really serve that up and say, okay, I think this might be where you want to go, where you want to take that next step. Mm-hmm. And then, in this case, these students can make that next step if it truly does match up with what they're trying to achieve.
All true. All true.
So the other part of this that I'm curious about is how you think about impact and documenting impact. There's the numbers that you talked about, but how do you think about success rates and stuff like that? Because let me state it a little bit differently. I was puzzling through this a few months ago, which is so many of our success metrics, for example, in college and post-secondary, are around what I would call supply-side metrics. They're, did people complete, right? Did people do X? And they're easy. They're things that are easy to measure from the provider because that's what I've been set up to do, but they don't necessarily map onto an individual coming with a particular purpose. Like some people just want to explore, and if they get more information that allows them to make a choice outside of the institution, that might be a success for them. Some people, frankly, they go to a certain place because they need to get the heck away from their current reality. It just ain't working for them, and that's the success. How do we, measuring success on the demand side based on what the individual wants is something we haven't put a lot of thought into as a field. But fundamentally, you're living in the demand side of the world, trying to discover what people want to do and be in their lives as they progress. So how do you think about impact and outcomes from that side of the ledger?
So we do. We have an impact measurement pyramid that we use. And I would have to say that one of the things that I have come to understand, again, through a lot of research, is that we are tracking choices students make and things that they do that follow on from the first exploration to I decided to sign up for a boot camp, or I decided to fill out a financial aid form because I want to go to this college because I want to study physical therapy. But the overarching thing that we are measuring right now, which seems to have, I would say, the best predictor of success for this, is confidence. When you're measuring a young person's confidence about the choices that they've made, you can see that we're not talking about that young person who somebody is counseling in their freshman year, wherever they may happen to be, and they're looking at someone in student affairs and saying, I really don't know why I'm here. That is not likely to happen. More kids are going to be going to college who are confident in that choice, as are students pursuing all other walks of life. But they are confident that they've got the information that they need to make those good choices.
To make an informed choice. I hope it works the other way too, by the way. I hope the supply side, the colleges and other programs, can start to differentiate more to create clear choices that match up with that stated preference of I'm trying to do X. Hey, as I look out at the four-year colleges, it's not actually entirely clear what matches up for, toward X. So I'm hoping colleges evolve as you help students make better articulations of their demands, if you will, out of this.
And I think they will. I think the whole world of education is evolving, and I absolutely believe that our brothers and sisters in higher ed are going to do exactly that.
Well, on that note, I am confident that you are starting to move the needle. And for people looking to learn more, check out what ASA is doing. I think it's a tremendous commitment to a part of the ecosystem that until a few years ago was not getting the attention that it needed, deserved, and frankly, the students need this support. So, Jean, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, very much.